My name is Mirelle Dawson. I was 24 when my father's silence became permanent. The funeral home smelled like lilies and carpet cleaner, a combination I would never be able to separate again. I stood at the edge of the reception line in a black dress that didn't fit right, shaking hands with people who kept calling me such a strong girl, as though strength were something you could see on a person's face. Vivienne stood beside the casket the whole afternoon, dabbing at eyes that never quite produced tears. She had married my father 6 years earlier, after my mother passed, and in that time she had rearranged our house, our holidays, and eventually our family photographs, replacing the ones with my mother in them with ones that didn't feature her at all. I never said anything. My father loved her, or believed he did, and I had learned early that peace was easier to keep than truth. That night, after the guests left, I sat on the porch steps of the house I grew up in, listening to the crickets negotiate with the silence. Vivienne came outside in her robe, arms crossed, the porch light throwing long shadows across her face. "You should start packing," she said, not unkindly, just plainly, the way you'd tell someone the mail had arrived. "This house isn't really yours anymore, Mirelle. Your father and I made arrangements." I didn't argue. I had spent 6 years not arguing. "Take what you need tonight," she added. "I'll have someone box up the rest." I looked at her for a long moment, trying to find the woman who had once, years ago, sat with me in the hospital waiting room and held my hand without saying a word. I couldn't find her anymore. Maybe she'd never really been there. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which Vivienne had converted into a guest room 2 years prior, and found a single box already waiting for me on the bed. Efficient. She'd planned this before he was even in the ground. Inside the box, beneath old sweaters, I found something I hadn't packed. A small brass key, taped to an envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. I sat on the edge of the stripped mattress and stared at it for a long time before I had the courage to open it. "Mira," it began, the name only he ever used. Asterisk, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and there are things I never told you. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I needed you to find out on your own terms, when no one could talk you out of what's yours. Asterisk. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just held the key, like it was the last warm thing in the house. The letter was 3 pages, written in the shaking hand of a man who had spent his final months pretending everything was fine. Asterisk, you remember Whitfield and Rourke, the law office downtown, the one with the green awning we used to walk past on our way to the bakery. Go there. Ask for Nathaniel Cross. He has instructions. Tell no one where you're going, not even Vivienne. Especially not Vivienne. Asterisk. I read that last line 4 times. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the bare mattress in what used to be my room, listening to Vivienne's footsteps pace the hallway like she was already rehearsing which walls to repaint. Around 3 in the morning I heard her on the phone, her voice pitched low but not low enough. "The transfer should be finalized by Friday," she was saying. No, she doesn't know anything. He never told her about the accounts. He was sentimental, not smart. I lay very still, staring at the ceiling, feeling something in my chest go quiet and cold and clear, like a lake freezing over. He was sentimental, not smart. She had no idea how wrong she was. By 7, I was dressed and gone before she woke, the box of childhood things left behind, the letter and key tucked into my coat pocket like a second heartbeat. The morning was gray and thin, the kind of light that makes a city look like it's remembering something. Whitfield and Rourke occupied the 3rd floor of a building that still had its original brass elevator gate. Nathaniel Cross turned out to be an older man with tired eyes and the unhurried patience of someone who had spent decades being the last person to know a family's secrets before the family did. "Your father came to me 8 months ago," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "He suspected some things. He wanted to be sure, before he said anything to you, that what he suspected was true." "What did he suspect?" Cross folded his hands. "That his wife was moving assets. Quietly. Small transfers, structured to avoid notice. He had me trace them." He turned a page toward me. Bank statements, property deeds, a storage unit lease I'd never heard of, all bearing Vivienne's signature and, disturbingly, in several places, a signature that was supposed to be mine. I hadn't signed anything. She forged you into some of these transactions, Cross said gently. Your father found out 3 weeks before he died. He didn't confront her. He came here instead. I stared at my own name in ink I hadn't written, and for the first time since the hospital, I felt something other than grief. I felt awake. Why didn't he just call the police? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Cross leaned back. He was dying, Mirelle. He had weeks, maybe less. He didn't want his last months to be a courtroom. He wanted to leave you something better than a fight he wouldn't live to see finished. So, what did he leave me? Instead of answering, Cross reached into a drawer and produced a second envelope, heavier than the first, sealed with the same brass keys twins stamped into red wax. The house you grew up in, he said. It was never in both their names. Your father kept it solely in a trust, with you as sole beneficiary, set up the year your mother died. Vivienne has been living in a house that was never legally hers to sell, transfer, or claim. She simply never checked. I thought of her on the porch, telling me to pack. This house isn't really yours anymore. The irony sat in my mouth like something bitter and true. There's more, Cross continued. The accounts she believed she'd inherit, the ones she was quietly draining these past months, were never marital funds. Your father moved his savings into the same trust 2 years ago, after the first time he caught her lying about money. She's been transferring funds she has no legal claim to. Every transaction she made this year is fraud. I sat with that for a long moment, the storage unit lease sliding under my fingers. What's in the storage unit? I don't know, Cross admitted. He rented it under your name. He said you'd understand when you saw it. That afternoon, I drove to a squat building on the edge of town, my hands steady on the wheel in a way that surprised me. The storage unit rolled open to reveal not treasure, not drama, but boxes, carefully labeled in my father's handwriting. Asterisk Myra's mother, letters. Myra's mother, photographs. Mira, age 6, drawings. Asterisk everything Vivienne had quietly removed from our house over 6 years, packed away instead of destroyed, because some small stubborn part of my father had refused to let her erase what came before her. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit and finally let myself cry, not for the money, not for the house, but for a man who had spent his last strength protecting my mother's memory in secret, one box at a time. When I stood up, I wasn't the same woman who had walked in. I didn't go back to the house that week. I stayed with my friend Odalise, a woman I'd known since college who asked no questions and made too much coffee, which was exactly what I needed. I spent those days at Whitfield and Rourke instead, going through the trust documents line by line with Cross, understanding for the first time the shape of what my father had built quietly around me without my knowing. He hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me evidence, patience, and time, the 3 things Vivienne had never once thought I possessed. She's going to notice the accounts are frozen soon, Cross said on the 4th day. The bank flagged the forged signatures the moment we filed. She'll come looking for you. She did, on the 5th day, in the form of 11 missed calls and a voicemail with a crack running through the calm in her voice. Asterisk, Mirelle, there's some kind of mistake with the accounts, call me back. Asterisk, I didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, I asked Cross a question that had been circling in me for days. What happens to her? Legally, I mean, if I don't push it. She loses the house regardless. It was never hers. The forged signatures are a separate matter. That's a police report if you choose to file it. Fraud. Forgery. You'd be well within your rights. I thought about what my father had written. Asterisk revenge isn't in my nature, and I don't think it's in yours either, Mira. But truth is. Let the truth do what it needs to do. Don't do more than that. Asterisk. I thought about 6 years of quietly disappearing, my mother from the walls, my bedroom from the house, my voice from every family decision. I thought about Vivienne on the porch step, telling me to pack, so certain that grief would keep me small. I want the truth to come out, I told Cross. All of it. But I don't want to destroy her. I want her to have to look at what she did, clearly, without being able to explain it away. Cross studied me for a moment, something like respect crossing his tired face. Your father would have liked that answer. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I slept without waking at 3 in the morning. I met Vivienne at the house on a Sunday, on my terms, with Cross present and a folder of documents between us on the kitchen table where we'd eaten 1,000 quiet dinners. She arrived expecting to negotiate. I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the practiced concern already arranged on her face. "Mirelle, honey, I know this is a hard time, but we need to sort out." "The house was never in your name," I said, sliding the trust documents across the table. "Neither were the accounts you've been transferring out since March." Her face didn't move for a moment, the way a held breath doesn't move. "Dad found the forged signatures 3 weeks before he died," I continued. My voice stayed level, the way I'd practiced in the mirror at Odalise's apartment.
"Mine."
"On transactions I never made. I don't know what you're—" "Please don't," I said, and something in my tone made her stop. "I'm not here to yell. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because I want you to understand that I know all of it, and I'm choosing what happens next, not you." Cross laid out the terms plainly. The fraudulent transfers would be reversed, the storage unit contents returned to me, the house vacated within 30 days. In exchange, no criminal complaint would be filed, not out of mercy for her, I clarified, but because my father hadn't wanted his death to become her trial. Vivienne's composure finally cracked, not into remorse, but into something more familiar. Indignation. He would have wanted me taken care of. 6 years, Mirelle. 6 years I gave him. He knew exactly how you spent them, I said quietly. That's why he protected everything before you could take it. She left the table without another word, and later that week, without a fight, without a courtroom, without a single raised voice, she left the house too. I stood in the empty front hall after the last of her boxes were gone, sunlight falling across floors that had once belonged to my mother, then to grief, then to silence, and now, finally, back to something that felt like mine. The house took weeks to feel like home again. I repainted my old bedroom myself, badly, the roller-leaving stripes I didn't bother to fix. I hung my mother's photographs back on the walls where they belonged, one by one, in the same order I remembered from childhood, though the nail holes from Vivienne's replacements were still visible beneath the fresh paint if you looked closely enough. I found myself talking to my father sometimes, in the kitchen mostly, where he used to hum off-key while making eggs. I told him about the letter, about Cross, about the storage unit full of boxes he'd protected in secret for years. I told him I hadn't destroyed her, the way some version of me might have wanted to in the rawest days after the funeral. I told him I'd let the truth do the work instead, the way he'd asked. I heard, eventually, through the small, unavoidable channels a town provides, that Vivienne had moved 2 hours away, into a rented apartment far smaller than the life she'd arranged for herself. I felt no triumph hearing it, only a kind of quiet, settled peace, the sense of a scale that had finally, gently, come back into balance. Odalise visited one evening with wine and the particular bluntness of an old friend. "You could have buried her," she said. "Legally, I mean. You had everything you needed." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I thought about it. But I didn't want the last thing I did in my father's house to be an act of cruelty. He spent his whole life trying not to raise me that way. "So, what did you want instead?" I thought about it for a long moment, watching the evening light move slowly across the kitchen floor, the same floor my mother used to stand on, the same floor Vivienne had once tried to erase. "I wanted to be the kind of person who could hold power and still choose gentleness," I said. "I think that's what he was trying to teach me, even at the end. Especially at the end." Autumn came, and with it, the strange quiet of a house that finally had nothing left to hide. I went through the storage unit boxes slowly, over many evenings, reading letters my mother had written to my father before I was born, looking at drawings I'd made at 6 years old that he'd apparently kept in a folder labeled, simply, "Proof she was happy here." I understood, reading through it all, that my father had spent his final years engaged in a quiet, patient act of preservation, protecting not just property, but memory, against a woman who had tried to overwrite both. I thought often about the moment on the porch, Vivienne telling me to pack, so sure that grief made a person small and manageable. I understood now that she had mistaken my quietness for weakness the whole time I'd known her. She had never once considered that a person could watch everything, say nothing, and still be building toward something. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need to. The silence between us said everything that needed saying, that some doors close not with slamming, but with the simple absence of a reason to open them again. I started, slowly, to rebuild a life that felt like my own rather than one arranged around someone else's comfort. I took a leave from work I didn't need to justify to anyone. I let the house breathe. I planted something in the backyard my mother used to keep, a small stubborn rosebush that had somehow survived years of neglect, and I found myself out there most evenings, hands in the dirt, feeling closer to both my parents than I had in years. Cross called once more, near the end of October, to confirm the final paperwork was closed, the trust settled, the fraudulent transactions fully reversed and documented. "Your father would be proud of how you handled this," he said. "Most people would have burned the house down, metaphorically speaking, just to watch her lose something." I thought about it. I admitted again because it felt important to be honest even now. But losing something isn't the same as understanding what she lost. I wanted her to have to sit with that. Quietly. The way I had to. Winter arrived early that year, the first snow falling soft and unhurried over the yard where my mother's rosebush had gone dormant beneath a thin white blanket, waiting, the way things sometimes do, for a season that hadn't come yet but would. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of tea, the house around me finally quiet in the way I'd wanted it to be, not the tense, careful quiet of 6 years pretending not to notice things, but a settled quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has fully passed and there's nothing left to brace against. I thought about my father's letter often, the line I kept returning to more than any other. "I needed you to find out on your own terms, when no one could talk you out of what's yours." I understood now that he hadn't just meant the house, or the accounts, or even the truth about Vivienne. He'd meant something larger, my own capacity to hold power without becoming cruel, to seek justice without seeking harm, to grieve without losing myself in the process. I never spoke to Vivienne again. I heard, once more, secondhand, that she'd left the small rented apartment for somewhere even smaller, and I let that information pass through me like weather, noted, acknowledged, and released. What stayed with me instead was the image of my father, in his final months, quietly packing boxes of my mother's letters into a storage unit under my name, protecting a version of our family's truth that no one had asked him to protect. He had done it anyway, patiently, without anger, because some part of him had always believed that truth, given enough time, finds its own way home. I finished my tea and looked out at the snow settling over the yard, over the dormant rosebush, over a house that had finally stopped holding its breath. My name is Mirelle Dawson. I was 24 when my father died, and Vivienne threw me out of a house that was never hers to give away. She never knew what he'd left me. Not just the house, not just the truth, but the quiet, unshakable knowledge of exactly who I was capable of becoming when everything else had been taken. She thought grief would make me small. Instead, it made me clear.